Some of these bikes are so cool. This is an Excelsior Henderson. I think it's a Super X from the 20s. Didn't read the thing behind it, but they resurrected the mark in the late 90s, and the Hanlon brothers basically spent $160 million and drove the thing into the ground, really. They never really came back with the original bike. This is a 4-cylinder inline. Most of the bikes at the time were D-twins. So that was very, very interesting. Indian had an inline 4 as well. There was another 4-cylinder inline. You can see the spark plug wires, right? Kind of cool. Oh, here it is right here. Here's an Indian with an inline 4. My dad's friend Dave Mayo had one of these inline 4. This also has a hand shift. You can see on the side here, you actually have to shift this with your hand, and the clutch was at your foot on that side, just like a car. So it was a handful to ride one of these things, you know. You had to be a mechanic at the same time, and you had to, it was a real experience to ride one of these bikes. Here's another older Henderson. So that's kind of cool. 1913, oh my god. These guys are so far ahead of their time. This one has an inline 4 too from 1913. Jesus. Look at the tires they had on. They look like these big bicycle tires that we have nowadays on the big bikes, the thickness of them. Yeah, it's kind of... There's another inline 4 Indian. Beautiful. Beautiful restoration. Wow. This is really cool stuff. I mean, you had to do all kinds of things. The throttle, I think, on these was on the left side. It was different than... I might be wrong, but I think it was on the left side, and then you had to set your spark advance on this side. So you're actually playing with the ignition while you're driving. I mean, it's ridiculous, you know, what you had to do. This is a police bike, it says here. Yeah. There's another inline 4. Holy crap, he's got so many inline 4s here. Wow. It's set up differently than it was last time, so when I came here. So here's the, they have inside the museum. I'm actually inside the museum now. This is the shop. They have a full working shop, what it would have looked like back in the teens and 20s, where someone would bring their bike in, and sometimes Matt is actually working in there most of the time. He'll be working on bikes in the back there. You can actually, let's walk over here, you can see, just give you an overall view of this place. There's upper floors too that you gotta go up and see things. And then there's all these down here. When Dale was 60 years old, he went and he started every single bike in this place. I don't know how many there were over 100. 100 and something, well over 100, I think it's like 200. But he went and he started every single bike here in a 24-hour period. There was a whole show done on it, on his, What's in the Barn, I think is what his old show used to be on Velocity Channel. Used to watch that, but you can see this is just like a time capsule, all this stuff here. So you can actually see some of the equipment inside here that you can't get in there, but Matt sometimes, his son usually works in here. It looks like he's restoring a V-twin Indian. If you zoom in really close here, you can see the V-twin there. It's kind of cool. That's what it looks like. I mean, it's here's an early Harley Davidson here. This looks like it's from the teens. This is James Garner was in a show back in the 60s, I think it was, where it was a period show in the early 1900s, and he was a sheriff of a town. He actually rode one of these. I think his was like a 1915 Harley as a sheriff in the show. There's another bunch of these things. Beautiful. Some of these are just left as they are. This is unrestored here. If you look at the patina on this Harley, this is from the teens. And completely unrestored. They just leave them like this. Dale wasn't one of these guys. Occasionally he'd come across one and they would do a full restoration like this Harley here. Let me zoom out. But where someone it'd be almost, what we would call museum quality or something like that. But most of the time he loved finding these kind of bikes like this that had the old patina and he would restore these and not touch the patina at all, you know. So that's the original paint that was on that bike, probably. So that's kind of cool. Here's a bike with a sidecar of the day. That's kind of interesting too. Huh. Yeah. You can see it's just so much for your senses here. You're smelling it, you're seeing all these old bikes on display. It's another place in Alabama that has a pretty good collection, but it's more set up like a museum. This is set up like you could get on and ride any of these bikes out of here. There's another section here where they have the old cars and just bikes everywhere. I think there's over 300 bikes on display here, so there's a lot going on here. This is an old Cadillac convertible. It's like in the 50s, like 55 or something like that. Cadillac convertible. You can see what these cars look like at the time, you know. So this one looks like it's got the original leather interior and stuff. Yeah, you can tell it's all cracked and stuff. It's 54. I was close. There's another sedan Cadillac here. This one looks older. 49. There's another row of bikes here. India made some small bikes at one time too. Harley did. So these are kind of the little tiddler bikes that they made back then. This looks like 250s. This one looks a little bit smaller, maybe a 125. So they made smaller bikes. The one they made for the military, I think, was 750cc. Here's one that's unrestored here. You can see all these different bikes. It's pretty impressive here. Most of these look like they're from the 30s and 40s, or just to average them out. So it's pretty amazing. This would be something more like what my dad had over here. He had a 62 FLH. I think this is in the ballpark in that era. He didn't have a police bike. He had the double seat. So you can see, you know, the saddlebags would be, he had these on the back. Like, these are hard to get nowadays because a lot of people chop these bikes. It's hard to, it says 63 here, so it was close. My dad had a 62. So this is very, very close to the bike he had. His was black and yellow. And like I said, it had the dual seat. So that would have gone over the top of this thing here instead of having this top box here. But this is pretty much the bike that he had. But his was, you know, perfect paint and everything. He was a machinist too, so he did a lot. These bikes used to leak a lot of things. I think it was down here somewhere. And he had taken this whole thing apart and put it on a lapping plate and just made it so perfectly flat that when they put them together with gaskets, it never leaked. He also did a custom set of floorboards for his bike. He had an actual chain from the back end here. He took it, he chromed it, and he welded it around here like this, and it was all metal. So he had kind of like a metal with a chain all the way around. And that's the kind of bike he had. He had the crash bars too. And the shields and the double lights up front. In this case here, they had the red lights because it's a police bike, but my dad had, I think it was the white lights. You can see it's a pretty impressive thing to ride. And in some cases, it's lighter than some of the touring bikes, and nowadays it's so ridiculous. This is a service car. If I'm not mistaken, they made these for a very long time. I think they made them almost up into the 80s. It's probably written on some of the... I'm just reading the text here. It doesn't really say, but they made these service cars for a long time, so somebody could do a delivery in this thing in the middle of the city, right? So you could actually back up a little because I don't have zoom on this crappy camera. But, you know, somebody would deliver things in a city with this thing. It's called a service car. Here's another 36. Trying to see if there's a... So this particular one here is another panhead. I believe. No? 63. Yeah. It's got the pan head. There's all these different names for these bikes. I'm not all that familiar with all of them, but there's something called a knucklehead. This is a knucklehead over here. They went through generations and they usually could tell. It was usually what was on top of the cylinders here. This thing kind of looks like a knuckle here. So the difference between a flat, rounded pan head, which is, you know, later 50s into the 60s, and the knuckleheads that came in. I think it was in like the, I forget if this was in the 30s or 40s. People talk about knuckleheads, that's what they mean. And sometimes he's got some twins. I remember seeing this on a TV show. He's got a set of twins here. Same color scheme. So this is really cool. And these are knuckleheads, huh? You know, again, it looks like a knuckle. And all these were, and it looks like how, you know, the pedals on your bicycle, but that's what they used to kick these things over. You'd turn it out and kick it down. Some people, you had to watch it because if it didn't start, you could break your leg. The thing would come back on you and hit you in the back of your leg, or some people broke their ankles because the exhaust pressure and everything, the thing didn't start, came back and got you. So you had to watch how you kick these things over. There was no automatic start back then. So these are two sets of twins here, I guess, huh? The white ones here and the other ones over there. This one says 1925. This is a really old Henderson. Online. There's so much for the senses here. I remember somewhere up here, up top, there's the original chopper that was used in the movie Easy Riders. I think Joe Namath was in there, but a bunch of other guys. It's got 8 hanger bars and stuff. It's got, you know, like the American flag on the tank and stuff like that. That was a pretty famous movie back then. Back in the 60s, I think. Just walking through and seeing some more bikes here. So this is the competition here. You know, so much of this is about Harley riders because Indian went out of business in the 50s. 1953, they went bankrupt. And it wasn't until the 80s that several companies tried to reboot it. And they just did an awful job. And they, you know, in 2000 or so, they tried to reboot it again and didn't work. And then Polaris bought the Indian brand, I'd say about 5 years ago, and they're a multi-billion-dollar company. They make snowmobiles and everything, and they were, you knew they were going to succeed. So this is a really old Indian, probably from the 40s or the 50s. And you can see the balance fenders, just the way they made bikes back then and everything. People chopped these things off. They didn't like them, so it's hard to find some of the ones that have them fully valence like this from the factory. But since Polaris rebooted the brand again, I think they're going to hang around, and people are starting to look at Indians because everyone's got a Harley, right? It's the only one that survived, and so Indians are kind of unique in that way. And the older ones are very valuable because they stopped making the older ones in '53. The 40s are really, really valuable. It's another nice Harley. This is the kind of stuff that people did to some of these bikes here. They kind of chopped the back end. That kind of thing. It says here this is some Cycle World time machine special, whatever that was, 1946. So these are from the 40s, 1946. And of course, this is a knucklehead. Right? There's some older bikes. It's not all Harleys here. Here's a Marsh. There's some bikes that were made in Springfield, motorcycles of the day. This looks like an early 1900s one. Yes, it's 1904, it says here, Marsh. That's kind of cool. Here's an Apache. Says it's made in Denver, Colorado. Apache motorcycle. 1908 Apache. I may turn this off in a bit just because it's kind of annoying having me walking around and talking at the same time. But people are looking at me funny. There's another row of bikes here next to the workshop. This is probably a better view of the workshop that we were just around. The inside workings of the workshop, where people would work, and all the old tools they would use. Matt uses all the old tools. Dale, of course, passed. And Matt he's the face of the Wheels Through Time. They actually renamed the place Dale's Wheels Through Time now, after his passing. You can see like parts all over the place. This is a half a tank. There's 2 tanks on these bikes, left and right side on some of them, and that's probably worth $1,000 right there. This is a 1911 Indian. It's kind of cool. You don't see many of these Indians that are that old. This is like a lot of his stuff, it's unrestored. A lot of the really good stuff next to the bike shop here is unrestored. And a lot of this stuff, I guess, is work in progress. But you can kind of get the sense of it. It's hard because you really, it's like smell-o-vision here. You really have to take in the whole experience of what bike riding and cars back then were. They were always leaking oil. They were always gas all over the place. You know, it's always a smelly proposition to get in a car. And get on a motorcycle for sure and ride it without it breaking down, you know. You always fiddling with it, putting someone's starting a bike back there. So that's often going to happen here, is that Matt sometimes will start bikes for kids that want to hear them. So while I'm walking through here, they're probably going to start a few bikes. This is all the racing bike series. He's got a whole roundabout thing where he has all these bikes where people race these on dirt tracks. They race them on hill climbs. People do hill climbs. This is probably a hill climbing machine. Look at the size of that sprocket attack. All these kind of things. And then the wall of death. They went around and around these wooden tracks. Sometimes it was ridiculous how they raced some of these bikes on wooden tracks, canted tracks. I mean, if you fell down, you got a 12-inch splinter through your leg because it was all wood. So it's funny up there. It's 80 miles per gallon. So here's another view of the bikes here. Probably gonna fill up this phone with the video here, but I don't care. This seems to be showing you all the different engine technologies of the time. This is more of this display of the racers. Here's a hill climb machine. Look at the change you put on the back of it. This is to get the gearing because you're literally going up a hill like this, trying to get to the top of the hill, and all the weight had to be such the person was hanging over the bars. That was the thing. Look at this guy flipping over here. Kind of go up the hill and get so far, and the bike flipped over. Just a lot of, this is a museum. It's all about the history of the bikes, what people did with them, how they hot rodded them, things like that. It's a fascinating, he collected this probably over 50 years of his life. He passed recently, but Sinclair used to be a gasoline station. It was a dinosaur. It was a Brontosaurus, I think, was the mascot. Sinclair Gas. He's probably still around in the 60s. I remember seeing Sinclair Gas pumps and things. So I'm just gonna hurry through here so I don't run on the video. This is the back of the shop here, pretty much. Here's another shop, sales and service. You see it here. So it's another shop. It looks like they're showing like they're in the process of building one thing. Here's the pan head. Here's a really good view of the pan head. You can see it look like a pan and then knuckle head here. Knuckle head. Here's an earlier one from maybe the 20s or 30s, probably the 30s. And that looks like a pan head restoration in the background here. Nice one. Probably very close to the one we looked at, the one my dad had, that from roughly the 60s, I would say. There's more. Oh, here's a good example. If you look up here, how these guys raced on these canted tracks. You know, they were literally, this is all made out of wood, and these guys are like got their head down and they're on these little tiny tires going, I don't know how fast, probably 100 miles an hour. It was real daredevil stuff. I mean, people got killed all the time. If you crashed there, you were screwed. You got run over by other guys, and unbelievable. There's more. We backed away here. There's a whole other display here. Here's some more early Harleys in a row. These look like from the teens. 1907 to 1929, it says. So this is what they would race on, these little tracks. People were nuts back then. You know, they did all daredevil things. Everyone wanted to break the Guinness Book of World Records and get in the record book. So there's all these people doing daredevil things, going over barrels over Niagara Falls and crap. This is all happening at the same time. Things were booming before the Great Depression, before the stock market crashed in the late 20s. People were doing all the good stuff was invented in the 20s. Believe me, I don't care what anyone says. Everything happened in the 20s. That's where all the cool stuff happened. Everything was invented that was worth anything was in the 20s. Everything that we see today, electricity, everything, all the way up to the 20s, I would say. Pretty cool stuff. Anyway, I'm going to shut this off now.
Hey, sir, how do you do? All right.
So,
Good to meet you, man.